Thanks, David. I'd like to welcome everyone today. Our session is going to be a panel discussion on agency implementation of the Unique Entity Identifier, or the UEI. My name is Mark Sweet. I'm from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I'm also a member of the FDP ERA committee. We've had several sessions over the past few meetings on the Unique Entity Identifier. So if you're not familiar with the UEI, you can go back to those sessions that are posted on the FDP website and become a little bit more familiar with these issues. David, if you could go to the next slide. I'd really like to welcome our agency panelists today. From the USDA, we have Tyson Whitney, followed by Cassima Garst, Michael Martin, and Lori Roman from the NIH. And finally, we have Avi Tembukar from the National Science Foundation. Again, we will have time to answer questions during each one of these agency presentations. So if you have a question, please enter it in the chat. At the end, we'll likely have a few minutes. If we have additional questions, we'll be able to have maybe a little bit more interactive session, but feel free to add your questions in the chat box. So with that, David, next slide. I'm going to turn it over to Tyson. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Tyson Whitney, and I work at the Department of Agriculture in the Office of the Chief Financial Officer. I'm in the Transparency and Accountability Reporting Division, and I'm responsible for a variety of things, including grants policy, Data Act reporting, and a variety of other ad hoc reporting and financial reporting needs for the department. Today, I'm here to talk to you about the Unique Entity Identifier, and I'm the liaison across the department for implementing that requirement across our various systems, tools, and forms. If we could go to the next slide, please. So as you can see here, I will try to cover in general terms what the UEI means for USDA, give you a little background about how we have the various issues that we will be facing and the various systems, tools, and forms that we will be addressing. We will talk about readiness, in other words, what steps we're taking to ensure that we're compliant by the required date, and what our next steps are between here and the implementation date in April of next year. And then I'll pause and see if there's any questions. So let's go ahead to the next slide if we can. So some of this information you probably already know, but the UEI is now going to be replace the DUNS number as a way to identify each registrant in the System for Award Management, or SAM.gov. It's being used for financial assistance as well as contracts. The focus of my talk today will predominantly be with financial assistance because that's really my area of expertise. Fortunately, also on the procurement side, meaning with contracts, we have fewer systems and a more unified approach to implementing that. So in order to get prepared for this effort, we've gone out and communicated with our chief financial officers within each of the component agencies at USDA. We've established working groups with representatives from each of the agencies with grant-making systems or contract writing systems. And we've also been participating with O&B meetings up until this point as well. We recognize a couple of the challenges that we're going to face with this. The timeline is fairly tight. The reason I say that, I know that it's over a year, but it's challenging to get system changes in when system updates have already been planned and scheduled for sometimes a year or several years in advance. Also, this is an unfunded mandate, so there are some challenges for us in terms of funding the upgrades to the various systems that we need to address. And we also looking at contingency plans, what we would do if we're not able to achieve the optimal state of having full automated solutions, what we would do in its stead if we're unable to fully automate by the April date. So with that, if we could go to the next slide, please. So And the first bullet, I'm citing the two pieces of regulation that tell us the UEI requirement. So 2 CFR Part 25 covers it for financial assistance, and the FAR covers it, of course, for contracts. So as you all probably know, entities will no longer need to get a DUNS number. And so there's SAM.gov will automatically assign the unique entity identifier whenever an entity goes in to either register for the first time or do any updates to their registration information. So it's automated in that regard. The UEI will be 12 characters and in terms of a data field, and it will be alphanumeric. If you go to the next slide, please. So when this first kicked off, OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, had several work groups to help agencies get ready and prepare for the implementation. They had the General Services Administration, or GSA, attend and brief us on information about how the UEI field would work, how validations would work, and other information so that we could plan for our implementation within the agency. As I stated, we need to be fully compliant with this by April of 2022. So while we did receive the standards back in July of 2019, we were also still waiting for some of the more technical pieces, the APIs, or application interface protocols, so that we could do some system connections and system testing. We got that by the end of 2019. And so if we could go to our next slide, please. So at USDA, we've basically broken down the effort to implement the UEI into two distinct groups. There's the procurement side and the financial assistance side. So fortunately at USDA, the vast majority of our contracts are managed through the integrated acquisition system. And so that's going to be that's basically one-stop shopping for most contracts. However, the Forest Service, a component of USDA, has a unique contract writing system and that deals with firefighting in particular. There's also one for web supply chain management, which is being used for the contracts around commodity procurements that we make. And there's also a very small one that we use in the Foreign Agricultural Service that has to do with staff that are over in embassies abroad. So that's the kind of the overview on our procurement solution. Within the Office of the Chief Financial Officer, we will be directly responsible for the predominant department general ledger called FMI, FMMI, and that stands for Financial Management Modernization Initiative. And we will also be responsible for the department grants management solution, which is called Easy Fed Grants. The agents, as you may know, USDA is kind of a confederation of agencies. So there's some things that we can have direct oversight in at the department level. However, there are a lot of systems that reside with the component agencies. So it is the responsibility of those individual component agencies to ensure that they make all necessary updates to be able to capture and validate the unique entity identifier in their own systems. And we realize that this is really a three-pronged approach, because not only do you have to make sure that your systems are up to date and ready to accept the UEI, but if you have a data collection form, which also known as an application form, or any part of the application package that collects the UEI, those forms would also need to be updated. And we also have a category that we identified at USDA of tools. So for instance, if an agency such as the National Institutes of Food and Agriculture have a special tool that, to present information on the web, for example, that includes the UEI, those tools also need to be updated. At this point, we probably have about 15 to 20 forms that will likely need to be updated. We've got probably 50 to 60 systems that need to be updated. And we have about 10 tools that will need to be updated across the department. Okay, if we could go to the next slide. So there's, as you all probably know, USDA posts all of its notifications for discretionary grants and grants.gov. However, we don't all necessarily accept application packages for all of those awards. Many of those programs are being accepted outside of grants.gov, meaning directly with the component agency through one of their systems. For example, EasyFed Grants accepts their packages directly instead of going through grants.gov. The reason I bring this up is that grants.gov made it clear to us that, to all agencies, that starting about a month or two ago, each federal agency had an opportunity to elect to adopt the new UEI-based forms or to continue to use the DUNS forms until the April cutover date. In the case of USDA, because we have a few agencies within the USDA who have not completed their UEI implementation, we've elected to stick with the DUNS number of forms until April, at which point we will cut over to UEI forms. And again, it's just we need a little more time given the scope and the breadth of what we need to achieve at USDA. If we could go to the next slide, please. Okay. So, we've talked a little bit about this. These changes are going to impact financial assistance systems. So for those who are attending the meeting, mostly you all are probably thinking of grants and cooperative agreements, but USDA also needs to take into consideration loans, both direct and guaranteed, indemnities, insurance, partnership agreements, and a variety of joint ventures and a variety of other financial instruments that we have. So it adds another level of complexity because of the wide spectrum of financial assistance within our portfolio. There's also many interfaces between systems that we need to make sure that we update. APIs, for example, that connect us with grants.gov, with SAM.gov. There's also interfaces from our contract writing system to FPDS, which is the government-wide federal procurement data system. And we have a variety of other interfaces that we need to monitor. And we also have to update our forms. At USDA, there's 16 different entities that make grants and cooperative and other types of financial assistance. So we're coordinating across 16 components to make sure that we get this implementation in. As I said before, there's probably 50 to 60 systems and interfaces that have the DUNS and will need to capture the UEI. Okay, if we could go to the next slide, please. I'm sorry if this is a little busy on this slide, but I did want to try and break this down a little further. In terms of EasyFed Grants to Department Solution, we have the agencies that are listed here in the 6 bullets that you see on your screen. So this system does not, of course, encompass all of the grants systems or all the grant-making agencies, but it is the main system for the department. Also, there are instances where an agency may have an additional system outside of EasyFed Grants. For example, the National Institute of Food and Agriculture uses EasyFed Grants, but they also have other grant-making systems where they're tracking programs outside of EasyFed Grants. So in order for us to be ready to take on the implementation, we meet regularly with the agencies to confirm that they are on track. We have a project plan to ensure that we're tracking our milestones so that we can meet our April deadline. We do know at this time, however, we will have a challenge with the Rural Development Agency. Part of the challenge is that they have 2 separate general ledgers and a variety of systems that are all interconnected. So the lift for them is going to be rather extreme. They're looking at whether they can come up with a manual reporting procedure for data act reporting to ensure that the UEIs are captured. This will not impact the entity registrations at SAM. Entities are to go ahead and continue to comply with those registration requirements. It is simply a matter of whether rural development will be able to catch up in time to ensure that they're able to capture the unique entity identifier. Okay, if we could go to the next slide. The Farm Service Agency is another agency with rather unusual circumstances. Over the years, there's been a variety of legislative changes that have exempted programs in their portfolio from the unique entity identifier requirement. These include efforts made and passed through the Farm Bill, which occurs normally on a 5-year cycle. And the last one excluded all conservation-related programs. So there's no requirement for a unique entity identifier there. Also, a lot of the Farm Service Agency reporting is done in aggregate or is done to protect personally identifiable information. So there is no need to report out on the UEI. However, they still need to be able to accept it, and they are on track to do so. So from a department perspective, from the OCFO perspective, we're on track with the general ledger for the department, which is FIMI, and we're also on track to ensure that our department grants writing system is also compliant by that time. We're working with the other systems to ensure that they're on target, and we have regular meetings, and everything seems to be going pretty well, with the exception, of course, of rural development, which we mentioned. Of course, a lot of these, the implementation efforts by the agencies are sequential. So if many of them are waiting for us to ensure that we have the FIMI and EasyFed grants pieces done, which we just recently completed, so they can now complete their testing and validation and verification of the interfaces and the use of data that comes out of our FIMI general ledger into their source systems. Okay, if we could go to the next slide, please. So we're wrapping up our UEI implementation with our main general ledger. EasyFed Grants is completing their implementation. I believe that happened just actually a few days ago. The integrated acquisition system, our predominant contract writing system, is also now ready to complete its work. They've prepared their system for UEI. They're now in a position to do their testing. And we're also working with the agencies and staff offices that make financial assistance awards to and contracts to ensure that their systems are interfacing properly and that their UEI implementation is working for them. If we could go to the next slide, please. So that that's an overview of what we're doing here at USDA, and I'd be happy to take all of the or any of questions you might have from the audience. Thank you.
Tyson, I see one question that came in. I think I'm going to save that question to the end, so we could probably move on to NIH.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Cosma Garst. I'm a systems policy analyst in NIH's Office of Policy for Extramural Research Administration. I'm joined today by my colleagues, Michael Martin and Lori Roman from NIH Electronic Research Administration, or ERA. Next slide, please. So our portion of this presentation is being split into two parts. The first part I will cover related to the systems policy updates, specifically related to the application submission, as well as progress reporting and award notice of award related to the UEI changes. As you can imagine, and as Tyson mentioned, there are many systems that are involved that we will have to be making the UEI updates, but we're going to focus primarily on the external facing systems, as well as the application submission and the award process. Next slide, please. So NIH issued a guide notice, OD 21170, earlier this summer, which lays out our implementation, and that is outlined here on the slide. So effectively, we are implementing the changes in somewhat of a phased approach. So beginning in October, ERA will already be pulling the UEI data from organizations in the ERA comments that are registered in SAM.gov. There is no action that will be needed on the entities part for ERA to pull this information. One update from the guide notice is that you're going to start to see that UEI within the ERA comments IPF, the institutional profile file, early in January 2022. So even though we will be housing and that data from SAN.gov, it will not be immediately available in the IPF user interface side, but we are going to have that data in our systems. In October, you'll also begin to see on the recipient's notice of award on that page 1, that standardized page 1, you'll begin to see the UEI populated for those entities. And then we'll also be transmitting that data to to HHS Tracking, Accountability, and Government Grant System, or TAGS, as well as downstream to USA Spending. And then the big change, as we also noted in Guide Notice 21169, is that for applications due on or after January 25th, 2022, applicants must have a UEI at the time of application submission. The application forms and packages required for the application submission will be reflecting the UEI instead of the DUNS, and that is part of our Forms G transition. The key thing that we want to note is that since the SAM will still be requiring the obtainment of a DUNS in order to register entities through April 2022, you will still need to, any new organizations that are registering in SAM will need to obtain their DUNS prior to registration, but then they'll automatically be assigned that UEI. And my understanding also is that SAM will, starting in October, implement the ability for sub-award organizations and organizations that need to obtain a UEI but not complete the full registration in SAM will begin to be able to do that starting in October. DUNS will, of course, still be maintained in NIH and ERA systems for historical reference, and my colleagues will speak to that a little bit more in their technical discussion. Next slide, please. So this is just a screenshot of the Notice of Award page 1. As you can see here, it's a little bit small, I apologize. Item number 6, the UEI, is already on the Notice of Award page 1. And until the UEIs had been assigned, this information has just remained blank. And as you can see, item 5, the DUNS, is still going to remain for the time being. So recipients starting in October will start to see their DUNS populated as well as their UEI. Next slide, please. And so, as I mentioned before, Forms G is ultimately where we are going to implement the requirement for the UEI forms. The effective date for that, again, is due dates on or after January 25th, 2022. Key thing I wanted to note here on the slides that you will be provided after the presentation are the link to our guide notice, as well as our high-level summary of forms changes in the Forms G application packages. So that outlines all the changes, not just specifically for the UEI. October 25th, 2021 is when we will be posting our Forms G application guide. And then beginning at that same time, NIH will begin to post Forms G application forms packages to all of our active funding opportunity announcements. So during this transition period, both Forms F and Forms G application packages will be active simultaneously. So we just want to remind applicants again that they must choose the appropriate application package for their due date when presented with both Forms F and Forms G packages on the same FOA. And we have a table within that guide notice that further outlines how to determine which application package is correct for your due date. Next slide, please. So this slide outlines the forms that the UEI will be replacing the DUNS. These are grants.gov Fed-wide forms, as well as the NIH PHS forms that we manage. I believe there's 13 there. The asterisks indicate the forms versions that are currently under development at grants.gov, and we provided a link to the grants.gov form status report webpage where you can see these forms. The main thing to note here is that these are only the forms where the UEI is directly replacing the DUNS. However, as I mentioned before, you can refer to that guide notice and the high-level summary of the forms changes to see any other changes that are also being made to our application forms and instructions. We will also be replacing the UEI. Excuse me, the UEI will also be replacing DUNS on the NIH post-award forms, such as the RPPR. Final implementation details are forthcoming, but again, during that transition period, we will be displaying the UEI and the DUNS in the RPPR, but the competing application forms packages for Forms G will only contain the UEI. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Michael Martin and my ERA colleagues to speak towards the more technical implementation that they are conducting.
Thank you, Cosma. Hello, I'm Michael Martin. I'm a member of the ERA program, specifically in the data architecture group. You can go to the next slide, please. As Tyson pointed out, all partner agencies began doing high-level impact analyses in July of 2019. And then, of course, with the onset of the pandemic, most software development at the NIH was put on hold for this particular initiative. But at that point, we already had our high-level UE approach, which was that any of our systems that generated a document or a notification or had a web page that displayed DUNS, we would begin displaying both the DUNS and the UE during the SAM.gov transition period, which begins this October 1st and continues through April 3rd of 2022. As Cosima and Tyson both pointed out, at ERA, we're going to retain the DUNS data. We're not scrubbing it or getting rid of it, so that it'll be there for historical purposes and reporting. Even though most activity was placed on hold in 2020, there were a couple of very significant milestones that we've completed. One, in 2020, SAM.gov went through all of its active and inactive registrations to sweep through and assign a UE value for those organizations. At that same time, as Cosma mentioned, SAM.gov implemented automatically assigning a UE for any new organizations, and that's been in place since last year. So what we did at ERA, knowing that SAM.gov had made that met that milestone, we deployed a couple of our key data model changes to be able to support the UE. One change in particular would be to allow us to associate the UE with an application or an award, as noted in this middle bullet. And then secondly, that we would be able to associate valid UEs for an organization. As we know, an organization can have multiple DUNS. And so we made the data model changes to be able to support multiple UEs per organization. So we completed that, those two significant data model changes in October of last year. Then what we've been able to accomplish this year, the beginning of this year, this initiative at the NIH for the DUNS to UE transition restarted in February. And what we've done is we began pulling down data from SAM.gov that included UE and populating our data model in our lower environments, and also all the way up through our production environment. So we have been pulling the SAM.gov data down for that. Then in September, just a few weeks ago, at ERA, we went through the last 10 fiscal years of our award data. So from fiscal year 2012 to fiscal year 2022, we swept through and we populated the UE for those two key data model changes that we made. So we swept through and we, using the DUNS, we're able to assign a UE for every application and award. And we were also able to construct that mapping of valid UEs for an organization. So we've made our core data model changes. We've backfilled 10 fiscal years worth of data, and we will begin deploying systems starting in October, mid to late October, that already have made changes in their user interfaces and in their notifications to begin including UE, the UE value. As Cosma noted, the very first of which that you'll see is our notice of award. We'll begin displaying UE, and ERA or NIH, where we send our production award data, it will be included, the UE value will be included for where we send data to tags. So with that, I'm going to hand off to my partner, Lori Roman, for the next few slides to speak to those. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. My name is Lori Roman. I'm the product owner for eSubmissions. So my task is basically to tell you where we are as of today in September and what's going to happen in the next few months as we march towards January and beyond. So I'm happy to report that effectively, as of last week, we are able to support testing in our user acceptance testing environment for Forms G. So we have the eSubmission parts, our exchanges, and most but not all of our business rules, are also known as our system-wide validations, available in the user acceptor testing. So those that have access to that environment can certainly test away. We've also created a number of funding opportunity announcements for that environment. So it allows folks that need to do testing, such as our system-to-system providers, to go in and make sure that our career development process or processing of career developments and our R01s, that everything is set to go for them to support the submission later in January. We've also updated our services to include UEI. So for example, we can provide person information based on UEI, organization about the information about the organization, SAM, employment, prior grant history now can all be queried using UEI information. We will be retaining those services for DUNS for the foreseeable future. October is going to be a real busy month for us. You've already heard that we will basically be showing the UEI on the notice of award and including UEI in the tags reporting system. We will also then be deploying to production so that our production environment with all of our validations will be in place for everything but fellowships in small business on or around October 25th, 2021. So the system will be really poised, and that will allow our worker bees to start creating all of the packages and posting all of the funding opportunity announcements with Forms G packages in anticipation of that January 25th, 2022 submission date. We've also have plans in November to update our systems for reporting that will now start exposing the UEI in the reporter system. Next slide. And then in December, the eSubmission team will be deploying the rest of the Forms G related changing to support small business and fellowships. Please note, because of the very aggressive timeline we needed to employ to get these things ready for January, we will not be making the non-research changes until very early in calendar year 2022. So that's when you can expect the changes to non-research forms. And then in January, as we complete this transition, or I should say complete the first phase of this transition, The institutional profile will begin to show UEIs for organizations that are registered in SAM.gov. And it will allow also the profile will allow the functionality to allow appropriate or individuals with the appropriate credentials to update UEI information. And we will also then be including UEI information, as Kasima mentioned, on the RPPR. Again, the timing of that is to be determined. So with that, we've basically outlined what we've done, what our plans are, and we'll open this up for any questions.
Thanks, Lori. There are a few questions I think that would be useful to address now. There was a question that came up about, is there a way to look up one's UEI? And the short answer is yes. Everyone who has a current SAM.gov registration, you can see the UEI because they've been assigned. So going into SAM.gov is the easiest way. And then I think that there is a massive crosswalk table that's available from the Federal Help Desk. So it's more of a CSV file that has everybody who's been registered in SAM, their DUNS, and their UEI. So really, the current UEIs are all in SAM, and that's the place to find them. I think I'm just going to add a couple other notes about some questions about what's happening with subawards and profiles. So Kasima added a comment in there about when one needs a to be registered with a DUNS number in SAM. And according to the GSA information, people will need to do that through April 4th of 2022. After that point, then it's going to be all UEI and no one will need to use the DUN registration. Kasima, there's a question about delay of the Forms G. If that gets delayed, is there going to be, if the Form G release gets delayed, would the due date for updating to UEI be delayed? Can you comment on if Forms G are going to be delayed?
So we're not anticipating any delay with Forms G at this point. Our work in terms of ERA's technical development implementation, as well as the grants.gov development work, is currently on track for us. But if for some reason the implementation date of Forms G was moved, then yes, that would move the date as well for our requirement for the competing forms. But we're not anticipating that change at this time.
Especially since they're already in user acceptance testing.
Correct, yes.
And then finally, Tyson also added a link in the chat where you can look up the crosswalk between DUNS and UEI. So with that, I think we can move on to Avi. I don't see any other questions at this point.
Oh, Mark, actually, I think there was a further clarification from Jennifer's question. So the difference between the full registration in SAM and simply getting a UEI from SAM.gov for sub-awards organizations. So that was based off of an FAQ from the GSA webpage. And the sub-awardees that are not registering in SAM, starting in October of this year, they'll be able to request the UEI only without the full SAM registration. And I'll put the link to that FAQ in the chat as well.
Thanks, Kasima. All right, I think we can go on to the next, to Avi's presentation. So one more. Yep, thanks, David. All right, Avi, it's all yours.
Yeah, hi, good morning, everyone. I'm the third in the row. So by the way, I'm Avi Tembulkar from National Science Foundation. I'm an IT specialist at the Division of Information Systems. And I would go over what we are doing at NSF for the UEI implementation. Next slide, please. So, I'm not going to go on this slide much because Tyson and Kasima already covered a lot of this. But the good part is, it's a GSA mandate and to have agencies start using UEI, but the more importantly for the recipient community, you no longer have to have your DUNS number once this change is implemented. So there are a lot of benefits in terms of managing and maintaining your data directly in SAM. So, the challenges that you have been having about, like your name updates or your address updates would go away, and you have one-stop shop at GSA to, sorry, my screen just froze here. Hold on a second. Yeah. So that's a great thing, and it will be less burdensome for you. Next slide, please. So what NSF is planning to do is make the UEI changes by end of January 2022. And we haven't decided the date yet. The development is still in process, and there's a lot of systems connected at NSF, as well as, as you heard, that entire, federal government is changing to using UEI. So, but what I'm going to focus on is what really it impacts with the research community, and specific to that as to what's happening. So, like organization registration at NSF, we would require UEI, and we will no longer accept DUNS starting end of January. And however, as Kisima and Tyson also said that, until the actual cutover of April 2022, you would still require DUNS number to go to GSA to get to UEI. And then if you're not registered, if you're registered already, you already have a UEI, which you can see on sam.gov. And then you get that UEI and then register at NSF. And along with that, the maintenance of the organization information would be at GSA at sam.gov. So that's another good thing that's happening, because that information would be used across the board. And then I will go over some of the changes that are happening on research.gov and FastLane display changes for proposal preparation, award notices, reporting, and award search pages. So next slide, please. So organization information updates, NSF has this organization profile page, but with adoption of SAM legal business name and physical address being maintained at GSA, we would stop accepting any updates here, because we would directly get them from sam.gov. And so organization like names or name and physical address we would disable that link in FastLane. Next slide, please. So NSF has, NSF organization profiles have been maintained, like they predate SAM, or before SAM it was CCR. NSF has been maintaining even information before that. So we do have like NSF organization name, which can be different than legal business name in SAM in some cases. However, with more adoption to using SAM data more and more, we do we have already started using legal business name and for all the official purpose. However, there are situations like the one table on the right hand side, like SUNY has like multiple campuses and their organization names at NSF identifies where the campus is located. However, the DUNS number right now on sam.gov, they all have same legal business name. So it kind of can cause confusion in some cases. So what we are taking an opportunity to ensure that we show the legal business name along with the organization name in our displays. Next slide, please. So impacts to NSF systems and the display changes, mainly, as we talked, UEI will be the one that will be displayed. We no longer will display DUNS number. We would use the SAM legal business name along wherever possible. We will show it next to the organization name. If not, then it would be a tooltip. And I have some screenshots and notional screenshots as the development is still in progress to show you that. And then SAM physical address will be the record system of record from sam.gov. And along with that, one other change that's happening at sam.gov is the DUNS +4 or DUNS qualifier would be renamed as EFT indicator. And the value of that is not changing. It's just the label is changing. And so we would be making those changes also at NSF systems. Next slide, please. So this is a notional change to the research.gov user interface. So like the organization name, wherever we are displaying, we would show a tooltip. And once you click on that, you would actually see the legal business name. And that's one of the changes that we are showing. Next slide, please. So, or like in this particular case, we will show legal business name below the organization name for the entity or the organization. Next slide, please. So on the proposal cover sheet, we would change the DUNS number with UEI, and then for the name of the organization, we would switch to the legal business name, and the address would be the SAM physical address. However, the primary place of performance, we are still maintaining the organization name and the address, unless the primary place of performance is different than the institution or the organization name and address, then it would show the appropriate one. But those are the changes that are highlighted on the red with the red boxes. Next slide, please. So on the award notice, also we are making changes. Basically, anywhere there is official name to be displayed, it would be the legal business name, and then we will retain the organization name wherever possible. So the red box is where the legal business name would be shown. Next slide, please. And then in RPPR, along with the organization name, we would show the legal business name. I mean, I don't even have wireframes on some of these as the development is still in progress. But that's the direction we are going in. Do I have another slide? Yeah. And the award search page would also show the legal business name and the SAM physical address, and the DUNS number and the parent DUNS will be replaced by UEI. So that's essentially the changes that we have. like I'm not covering anything like internal systems and the interfaces, and along with the, like, this is mainly the financial assistance and the externally facing changes that typically may impact you, or you would see the changes. But along with that, we are also changing our financial system and our procurement system to reflect the UEI changes, and also the interfaces with all the shared service providers, and and pretty much every interface and every shared service would be exchanging uh, UEI information, and the downstream we also will be reporting UEI information to usspending.gov. So that's, I think, that my last slide, David? Yeah, thank you. I'm open for any questions.
Thanks again, Avi. I am not seeing any direct questions right now. A couple other updates. I think many of you may have listened in to the subawards presentation yesterday, and I'd like to reiterate a few of those points. So right now, the subaward working groups are in the process of updating the subaward forms to include the UEI. So you may see done/UEI on some of those forms. And as they said yesterday, right now they're not advocating necessarily using the UEI or the DUNS. You could put in either one. When we see the UEI, it's very obvious that it's different than a DUNS number. So I think it'll be pretty clear. The other thing that's happening with the FDP expanded clearinghouse, the development work is ongoing currently, and they are working to add the UEI to the profiles in the expanded clearinghouse. So I see there is a question for the CBS file. I don't have the link to that. I think there was a link from Tyson. He pointed, there might be instructions there on how to get to the CSV file, or it's from the federal help desk. I don't have it off the top of my head. We'll see if we can get that. We have several minutes left. Yeah, Tyson, go ahead.
To the person who was asking about that file, it's actually a .dat file. I opened it in Notepad, which is an application that's available on, at least on Windows-based PCs. And there's two choices. You can download either file, and it'll open up and it'll look like a CSV file. In the first two columns, you'll see the UEI and then the DUNS number. The file's very large. It's a zip file. It's 124 megabytes is the one I downloaded during the meeting to see if I could do that. So that link will take you to the public facing ones. So hopefully that'll be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Tyson. I think it might be a little overwhelming because it's every single sam.gov registration. And my understanding is that gets updated periodically. So as new registrants get on, they add them to those files. There are APIs that are available. You can read all of this information on the sam.gov website. David.
Yes, I just wanted to point out to everyone, I've seen a lot of links and instructions in the chat. And for you participants out there, if you don't want to lose that for now, you can save the chat to your hard drive. And you do that down in the bottom corner of the chat box. There's 3 horizontal dots. You can click on that and then choose Save Chat. And that way you can save all those links and all those instructions. Just wanted to let you know about that.
Thanks, David. I see there's a question here about, will UEI coordinate with the ROR research organization registry community? I have no idea about that. I've never heard of that before, but the UEI is directly related to working with the federal government and registering within sam.gov. It is the unique entity identifier for all of us that are working with the federal agencies. And there may be benefit in other organizations, like the FDP is updating our profiles to use UEI, but I cannot comment on the ROR. So Lori, I don't know if you want to comment. I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
Yeah, I don't know what the ROR is either.
Can we unmute Lori Schultz?
Oh, there we go. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I had messaged Mark in the chat because I saw that Shauna asked this question. So my knowledge of the ROR is limited, but it's equivalent is like the ORCID. It's like an ORCID for research organizations, and so it is an interesting question. I don't know if Shauna, if you had any additional thoughts based on that, but yeah, I think all these IDs everywhere identifying the same organizations, you know, convening into one or one that maps to many others is an interesting thought.
So right now, this is Avi, the GSA effort is mainly to move away from what government contract we had with Dun & Bradstreet, and it's just moving away from that. So DUNS number would be replaced with UEI, and that's the extent of it. It's not really accounting. I mean, at least the going in phase was not accounting for any other identifiers. So it's just that now it would be government owned identifier. I know it's one more. There's always opportunity for, you know, having a global identifier, because it does impact on a grand scale of things. However, at this stage, it's just one-to-one between DUNS and UEI, and that's the extent of it.
Thanks, Avi. That's a really good point. Any other questions for the panelists or each other? If you would like, you can add them to the chat or raise your hand. All right, David, I think with that, I'm not seeing any other questions. I'm going to turn it over to you.